Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to episode 14 of Rise and Fall of Ottoman Empire on AI Deen Vision. And today we delve into one of the most fascinating periods in Ottoman history, the 18th century. This era witnessed both spectacular extravagance during the famous Tulip period, and crucial attempts at reform as the empire faced mounting challenges from European powers. From Ahmed III's cultural renaissance to Selim III's radical reforms, this century would set the stage for the dramatic transformations of the Ottoman state in the modern era. We'll explore the reigns of 6 sultans who navigated the empire through changing fortunes: Ahmed III, Mahmud I, Osman III, Mustafa III, Abdul Hamid I, and the reformist Selim III. Their collective story tells us of an empire adapting to survive in an increasingly hostile international environment while struggling with internal contradictions. Join us as we examine how the Ottoman Empire, once the dominant military and political force in the Mediterranean and beyond, responded to changing circumstances through cultural innovation, military reform, and diplomatic maneuvering. The choices made during this century would shape the destiny of the Muslim world for generations to come. Sultan Ahmed III and the Tulip Era, 1703 to 1730, the 18th century Ottoman Empire opens with the reign of Sultan Ahmed III, who ascended to the throne after the deposition of his brother Mustafa II, following the Edirne incident of 1703. The new sultan inherited an empire still reeling from the devastating Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699, which had resulted in significant territorial losses. Ahmed III's early reign was dominated by the need to restore stability and recover from these setbacks. However, his reign is most remembered for the period known as the Lale Devri, or Tulip Era, named after the flower that became a symbol of luxury and refinement during this time. The Tulip Era was largely shaped by the influence of Ibrahim Pasha, who served as Grand Vizier from 1718 to 1730. This period represented the first significant Ottoman engagement with European culture and ideas, not just in military matters, but in arts and lifestyle as well. After years of war, the Treaty of Passarowitz in 1718 brought peace with the Habsburg monarchy, though at the cost of territories in the Balkans. With this relative peace, Ahmed III and Ibrahim Pasha turned their attention to cultural pursuits and urban development in Constantinople. The Tulip Era saw the establishment of the first Ottoman printing press by Ibrahim Mutafarrika in 1727, a Hungarian convert to Islam. This technological innovation would prove crucial for the spread of ideas and later reform efforts. The press published works on history, geography, and science, though religious texts remained the domain of traditional manuscript production. The period also witnessed a flourishing of architecture and garden design. The Sadabad Palace complex, built along the sweet waters of Europe, became the center of courtly life and elaborate entertainment. The Sultan and elite society engaged in lavish festivals illuminated by tulip-shaped candles, with poetry recitals and musical performances that sometimes lasted for days. During Ahmed III's reign, Ottoman diplomatic engagement with Europe expanded significantly. In 1720, the Sultan sent Yermesekis Mehmed Çelebi as ambassador to France. His detailed observations of French culture, science, and military organization were compiled in Seferetnam, which influenced later Ottoman reformers. These cultural exchanges had practical implications. French experts were invited to assist with military training, while Ottoman scholars began translating European scientific works. This marked a shift from the earlier Ottoman view that they had little to learn from European civilization. However, the extravagance of the Tulip Era came at a cost. While the elite enjoyed unprecedented luxury, the common people suffered from economic hardship and inflation. Military expenses remained high despite the period of relative peace, and corruption was widespread in the administration. The growing discontent culminated in the Patrona Halil rebellion of 1730. Halil, an Albanian janissary, led a popular uprising against the government. The rebels demanded an end to the extravagance of the court and the dismissal of Ibrahim Pasha. Unable to contain the revolt, Ahmed III was forced to sacrifice his Grand Vizier, who was executed. Shortly afterward, the Sultan himself was deposed in favor of his nephew, Mahmud I. The Tulip Era, though short-lived, represented a pivotal moment in Ottoman history. It marked the beginning of a cultural opening toward Europe and set precedents for later reformers who would attempt to modernize the empire while maintaining its Islamic identity. Sultan Mahmud I, 1730 to 1754, consolidation and recovery. Following the Patrona Halil rebellion, Mahmud I ascended to the throne in a climate of instability. His first challenge was to re-establish central authority after the popular uprising. The new sultan initially appeared to accommodate the rebels' demands, but within weeks, he orchestrated a counter-coup that eliminated Patrona Halil and his associates. Mahmud I proved to be a capable ruler who balanced tradition with cautious innovation. Unlike his predecessor's flamboyant style, he adopted a more measured approach to governance while continuing many of the modernization initiatives begun during the Tulip Era. Under Mahmud I, military reform received renewed attention. The Sultan appointed the French nobleman Claude Alexandre Comte de Bonneval, who had converted to Islam and taken the name Humbarachi Ahmed Pasha, to modernize the Ottoman artillery corps, Humbarachi Okagi. This represented one of the first systematic attempts to adopt European military techniques. Mahmud III's reign saw the Ottoman Empire engaged in conflicts on multiple fronts. In 1736, war broke out with Russia, soon joined by the Habsburg Empire. Despite initial setbacks, the Ottomans achieved a remarkable recovery. Under the leadership of Grand Vizier Hekimoglu Ali Pasha, Ottoman forces recaptured Belgrade in 1739. The resulting Treaty of Belgrade was the last major Ottoman diplomatic victory against European powers. The empire regained territories lost in the Treaty of Passarowitz, including northern Serbia and parts of Wallachia. This diplomatic success restored some of the Ottoman prestige that had been damaged by earlier defeats. On the domestic front, Mahmud I continued the cultural renaissance begun under Ahmed III, though with less extravagance. He was a patron of literature and poetry, and himself a composer of music. The Sultan commissioned numerous public works including libraries, fountains, and mosques throughout Constantinople. The Nur Osmaniye Mosque complex, begun during Mahmud's reign and completed under his successor, exemplified a new architectural style influenced by European Baroque elements while maintaining Ottoman traditions. This synthesis of styles reflected the empire's growing engagement with European culture while affirming its Islamic identity. Mahmud I also expanded the printing press established under Ahmed III, allowing for wider dissemination of knowledge and new ideas throughout the empire. This period saw the translation of more European scientific works and the beginning of Ottoman historiography that engaged critically with the empire's recent setbacks. Unlike Ahmed III, Mahmud I maintained a careful balance between innovation and tradition. He placated conservative elements, particularly the ulema, religious scholars, and the janissaries, while gradually introducing reforms. This pragmatic approach allowed him to rule for 24 years without facing serious internal challenges. When Mahmud I died in 1754, he left behind an empire that had regained some of its confidence. The diplomatic victory at Belgrade had provided breathing space from European encroachment, while cautious reforms had begun to address some of the empire's structural weaknesses. However, the fundamental problems facing the Ottoman state remained unresolved. The Janissary Corps, once the elite fighting force of the empire, had become a conservative obstacle to military modernization. The economic system struggled to compete with European mercantilism, and provincial governors continued to exercise increasing autonomy at the expense of central authority. These challenges would become increasingly apparent under Mahmud's successors as the empire entered a period of transition that would test its resilience and capacity for reform. Part 3. Sultan Osman III, 1754 to 1757. A brief and troubled reign. Osman III succeeded his half-brother Mahmud I in 1754. At 55 years old when he ascended the throne, Osman had spent most of his life confined in the palace under the cafes system, which isolated potential heirs to prevent palace coups. This long isolation had profound effects on his personality and ruling style. His brief 3-year reign is often overlooked in Ottoman historiography, sandwiched between longer and more consequential sultanates. However, even this short period reveals important dynamics within the evolving Ottoman state. Osman III was known for his eccentric behavior and suspicious nature. After decades of confinement, he developed a particular distaste for music, ordering musicians to be expelled from the palace. He also reportedly disliked the color green and ordered servants to avoid wearing it in his presence. During Osman's reign, factional politics dominated the court. He frequently changed grand viziers, appointing 5 different men to the position in just 3 years. This administrative instability prevented the development of coherent policies and undermined the continuity of reforms initiated by his predecessors. Despite his eccentricities, Osman III did commission several important architectural projects. The most notable was the completion of the Nuri Osmaniye Mosque complex begun under Mahmud I. This magnificent structure, with its distinctly Baroque influences, stands as the most significant architectural achievement of his short reign. The Sultan also established the Ihsaniye district in Istanbul and built the Ihsaniye Mosque. These construction projects provided employment and demonstrated continued Ottoman wealth and patronage of the arts, despite growing economic challenges. In foreign affairs, Osman III's reign was relatively uneventful, benefiting from the peace secured by the Treaty of Belgrade. However, this period saw increasing French influence in Ottoman politics and culture. The alliance with France, which had begun as a strategic counterbalance to Habsburg and Russian power, increasingly exposed Ottoman elites to European ideas and lifestyles. On the economic front, the empire continued to face challenges. The financial reforms attempted under previous administrations faltered due to resistance from entrenched interests and the Sultan's lack of sustained attention to governance issues. When Osman III died suddenly in 1757, he left no children. The throne passed to his cousin Mustafa III, the son of Ahmed III. Osman's brief reign had neither significantly worsened nor improved the empire's position, but the lack of consistent leadership had allowed underlying problems to fester unaddressed. Sultan Mustafa III, 1757 to 1774, reform attempts and military disasters. Mustafa III came to the throne with ambitions to restore Ottoman power and prestige. The son of Ahmed III, he had witnessed both the cultural flowering of the Tulip Era and its abrupt end. Unlike his predecessor Osman III, Mustafa had received a thorough education and took a keen interest in governance. From the beginning of his reign, Mustafa III recognized the need for reform, particularly in the military and financial systems. He appointed capable administrators, most notably Ragip Pasha, who served as Grand Vizier from 1757 to 1763, and provided stability and competent governance. Mustafa III had a particular interest in astronomy and mathematics, disciplines he believed could help predict events and guide policy. He expanded the Istanbul Observatory and patronized scholars in these fields. This scientific interest reflected a broader recognition among Ottoman elites that knowledge was a form of power that the empire needed to cultivate. On the military front, Mustafa III continued efforts to modernize the Ottoman forces. He recruited European military experts, particularly from France, to train Ottoman troops in modern tactics and technology. The artillery corps received special attention, with new cannon designs and training methods introduced. Baron François de Tott, a French officer of Hungarian origin, played a significant role in these reforms. He established a new engineering school, the Muhendishane-i Bar-i Humayun, Imperial Naval Engineering School, in 1773, which trained Ottoman officers in modern mathematics, fortification design, and artillery tactics. Despite these reform efforts, the Ottoman Empire was drawn into a disastrous war with Russia from 1768 to 1774. The conflict began over Russian interference in Poland but soon spread to Ottoman territories. The war revealed the continued weaknesses of Ottoman military organization despite recent reform attempts. The Russian-Ottoman War saw a series of devastating defeats for Ottoman forces. In 1770, the Russian Baltic fleet sailed around Europe and destroyed the Ottoman navy at the Battle of Chesme near the Aegean coast. On land, Russian forces under General Rumyantsev defeated the Ottomans in multiple engagements and occupied much of the Danubian principalities. By 1772, the military situation had become dire. Russian forces advanced deep into the Balkans, threatening Ottoman control of the region. However, Mustafa III did not live to see the end of the conflict. He died in January 1774, leaving his brother Abdul Hamid I to deal with the consequences of the war. Mustafa III's reign reflected the challenging position of the Ottoman Empire in the late 18th century. Despite genuine efforts at reform and modernization, the structural weaknesses of the Ottoman state, an outdated military organization, financial constraints, and resistance from traditional elites prevented these reforms from achieving their desired effect. The Sultan's death came at a critical moment, with the empire facing one of its most significant military crises. the stage was set for the disastrous Treaty of Kukuk-Kainarka, which would fundamentally alter the Ottoman Empire's position in European power politics. Sultan Abdul Hamid I, 1774–1789. Crisis and continuation of reforms. Abdul Hamid I inherited an empire in crisis. Just months after his accession, the Ottoman Empire was forced to sign the humiliating Treaty of Kukuk-Kainarka with Russia, concluding the disastrous war begun under Mustafa III. This treaty had profound implications for Ottoman sovereignty and prestige. The terms of the treaty were severe. The Ottoman Empire recognized the independence of the Crimean Khanate, which would be annexed by Russia in 1783, ceded territories in the Caucasus and northern Black Sea coast, granted Russia the right to navigate Ottoman waters, and accepted Russian claims to act as protector of Orthodox Christians within the Ottoman Empire. Additionally, the Ottomans were required to pay a large war indemnity. The Treaty of Kukuk-Kainarka marked a turning point in Ottoman history. For the first time, the empire had not only lost territory, but also aspects of its sovereignty. The Russian claim to protect Orthodox subjects represented an unprecedented interference in internal Ottoman affairs and would provide a pretext for future Russian interventions. Despite these setbacks, Abdul Hamid I proved to be a determined ruler who continued and expanded the reform efforts of his predecessors. Recognizing the critical need for military modernization, he maintained the new engineering schools established under Mustafa III and recruited additional European experts to train Ottoman forces. Abdul Hamid I appointed capable Grand Viziers, most notably Halil Hamid Pasha, who served from 1782 to 1785. Under his administration, comprehensive reform projects were initiated, including the establishment of new artillery and engineering corps trained in European methods, the reorganization of the traditional military units, reforms in the naval administration and shipbuilding techniques, financial reforms to increase state revenues and fund military improvements. The Sultan maintained a delicate balance between innovation and tradition. While pursuing military modernization, he also emphasized his role as a defender of Islamic traditions, rebuilding religious schools and patronizing the ulema. This approach helped mitigate resistance from conservative elements within Ottoman society. Abdul Hamid I was known for his personal piety and simple lifestyle, contrasting with the extravagance of the Tulip Era. He lived modestly and was accessible to his subjects, establishing a reputation as a caring ruler during times of hardship. During his reign, he also undertook significant public works projects, including the construction of the Beylerbeyi Mosque and the expansion of Istanbul's water supply system. The international situation remained challenging throughout Abdul Hamid's reign. In 1787, facing continued Russian expansion in the Black Sea region, and encouraged by an alliance with Prussia, the Ottoman Empire declared war on Russia once again. The Habsburg Empire soon joined Russia, creating a two-front war for the Ottomans. Despite reformed units showing improved performance, the overall military campaign went poorly for Ottoman forces. Abdul Hamid I did not live to see the conclusion of this conflict. He died in April 1789, leaving his nephew Selim III to inherit both the ongoing war and the continuing struggle to reform and revitalize the Ottoman state. Abdul Hamid I's reign represented a critical transition period. While unable to reverse the empire's declining military position relative to European powers, his reforms laid important groundwork for the more radical transformation that his successor would attempt to implement. Sultan Selim III, 1789 to 1807. The Era of New Order. Selim III came to the throne during a moment of crisis, with Ottoman forces engaged in a losing war against both Russia and Austria. The new Sultan's first priority was to conclude this conflict, which was achieved through the Treaty of Jassy with Russia in 1792 and the Treaty of Sistova with Austria in 1791. Though the territorial losses were less severe than in previous conflicts, these treaties confirmed Russia's dominant position in the Black Sea region. With peace secured, Selim III embarked on the most ambitious reform program the Ottoman Empire had yet seen. Known as the Nizam-i Cedid, or New Order, these reforms targeted virtually every aspect of Ottoman state and society, with particular emphasis on military reorganization. The centerpiece of Selim's reforms was the creation of an entirely new army corps, trained and equipped along European lines. Unlike previous reform efforts that had focused on specific military branches like artillery or engineering, the Nizam-i Cedid army represented a comprehensive alternative to the traditional Ottoman military structure dominated by the Janissaries. To fund these reforms, Selim III established a new treasury called the Iradi Cedid, New Revenue. This financial innovation aimed to create a dedicated funding stream for the reformed military units, insulating them from opposition by traditional power centers. The military reforms were accompanied by diplomatic innovations. Selim III established the first permanent Ottoman embassies in major European capitals, including London, Vienna, Berlin, and Paris. These diplomatic missions were tasked with observing European military and political developments and fostering relations that could benefit the empire. Education received significant attention under Selim III. The Sultan expanded engineering schools and established new educational institutions focused on military sciences, medicine, and administration. These schools introduced Ottoman students to European languages, particularly French, which became increasingly important for diplomatic and technical training. The naval arsenal was reorganized under the supervision of French engineers, and new ships were built according to the latest European designs. This naval modernization was essential given the empire's recent defeats at sea and the increasing importance of maritime power in the Mediterranean and Black Sea regions. Selim III also attempted administrative reforms, seeking to combat corruption and inefficiency in the provincial governance system. He issued a series of regulations aimed at curbing the power of provincial notables, ayans, who had become increasingly autonomous during the 18th century. Despite their ambitious scope, Selim's reforms faced powerful opposition. The Janissaries, whose privileges were threatened by the new army, were particularly hostile. Conservative religious scholars viewed the European-inspired changes with suspicion, while provincial powerholders resisted attempts to reassert central authority. The international context further complicated reform efforts. The French Revolution and subsequent Napoleonic Wars created both opportunities and challenges for the Ottoman Empire. Napoleon's invasion of Egypt in 1798 demonstrated the continued vulnerability of Ottoman territories, while also creating temporary alliances with Britain and Russia against France. Selim III maintained diplomatic flexibility during this turbulent period, navigating between the competing European powers. However, the costs of military campaigns and reforms strained the empire's finances, leading to inflation and economic hardship that undermined popular support for the Sultan's initiatives. The opposition to Selim's reforms culminated in the Edirne incident of 1806, when Janissaries and conservative elements revolted against the new order. The following year, a full-scale rebellion led by the Yamaks, auxiliary troops, and supported by conservative religious leaders forced Selim III to abdicate in favor of his cousin Mustafa IV. The reformist sultan's deposal represented a temporary victory for conservative forces within the Ottoman system. However, many of Selim's innovations, particularly in education and technical training, had created a cadre of officials committed to modernization who would influence future reform efforts. Selim III's reign, though ending in failure, represented a crucial turning point in Ottoman history. His comprehensive approach to reform acknowledged that military modernization required corresponding changes in administration, education, and diplomacy. This understanding would shape the more successful reform movements of the 19th century, making Selim III a pivotal figure in the Ottoman transition to modernity. The legacy of the 18th century Ottoman state. As we conclude our exploration of the 18th century Ottoman Empire, it's worth reflecting on the transformative nature of this period. From the cultural efflorescence of Ahmed III's Tulip Era to the radical reforms of Selim III's New Order, the empire underwent significant changes as it attempted to address mounting challenges. The 6 sultans we've examined, Ahmed III, Mahmud I, Osman III, Mustafa III, Abdul Hamid I, and Selim III, each contributed in their own way to the Ottoman response to a changing world. Their collective legacy reveals several important patterns that would shape the empire's future trajectory. First, the 18th century marked the beginning of Ottoman acknowledgement that European powers had achieved military, technical, and economic advantages that required systematic response. The gradual shift from viewing Europeans merely as infidels to recognizing them as sources of potentially useful knowledge represented a profound cultural transformation. Second, military reform consistently emerged as the most urgent priority, given the empire's declining fortunes in warfare. However, each successive reform effort revealed that military modernization could not succeed in isolation from broader administrative, educational, and financial changes. Third, the pattern of reform followed by conservative backlash became established during this century. The tension between modernizers and traditionalists would remain a defining feature of Ottoman politics well into the 19th century. The diplomatic position of the Ottoman Empire also underwent a fundamental transformation during the 18th century. From a position of strength from which it could dictate terms, the empire increasingly found itself reacting to European initiatives. The emergence of the Eastern Question, European debates about how to manage the perceived Ottoman decline, reflected this new reality. Yet despite these challenges, the Ottoman Empire demonstrated remarkable resilience. Even as it lost territories and faced internal upheavals, the state maintained its core institutions and adapted to changing circumstances. The reform initiatives, though often frustrated by resistance, built upon each other to create a cumulative effect that would enable more successful transformations in the following century. As we move forward in our series, we will explore how the seeds planted during the 18th century would grow into the more comprehensive Tanzimat reforms of the 19th century. The struggle between tradition and innovation, between maintaining Islamic identity and adopting European techniques, would continue to define Ottoman history until the empire's ultimate dissolution. The lessons of this period remain relevant today, as Muslim societies continue to grapple with questions of modernization, cultural authenticity, and response to external pressures. The Ottoman experience offers valuable insights into the complexities of these challenges and the diverse ways they can be addressed. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of the 18th century Ottoman Empire. If you found this episode informative, please consider supporting AI Deen Vision by subscribing to our channel and sharing this video with others who might benefit. In our next episode, we'll examine the dramatic transformations of the Ottoman Empire during the 19th century, including the Tanzimat reforms and the constitutional experiments that attempted to revitalize the state in the face of mounting challenges. Until then, this is AI Deen Vision, bringing Islamic history to life. Allah Hafiz.